Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's broadcast of Assessment of Animal Welfare Risks of Externalized Animal Studies by partnering Diligence and Scientific Review at GlaxoSmithKline, presented by Ann Vasbinder. I am Julianne Chiat of LabRoots, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that this event is interactive. We encourage you to participate by submitting as many questions as you want at any time you want during the presentation. Just click on the green Q&A button located on the lower left of the presentation window and type your question into the box that appears on the screen. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation. Also, please notice that you will be viewing the presentation in the slide window. To enlarge the window, just click on the screen icon located to the lower right. Finally, if you have trouble seeing or hearing the presentation, please click on the support button at the top right of the presentation window, or use the Q&A button to let us know you're having a problem. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Ann Vasbinder. Dr. Vasbinder has worked in the pharmaceutical industry for over 15 years. She currently works as the Director of the Office of Animal Welfare, Ethics and Strategy at GlaxoSmithKline. Her team oversees animal studies conducted on behalf of GlaxoSmithKline. Her work includes strategic planning for national advocacy efforts through work with organizations such as IQ Institutional Official Consortium, Americans for Medical Progress, One Health Research, and collaborations with European and Asian partners. Dr. Vasbinder received her doctorate in veterinary medicine from the University of Florida in 1995. She attended a residency training program at North Carolina State University from 1995 to 1997. Dr. Vasbinder served as the attending veterinarian at GlaxoSmithKline for the Research Triangle Park program from 2006 to 2010. Her professional interests lie in animal housing, global animal care and use programs, animal behavior, enrichment, training, and advancement of U.S. 3R's strategies. Please join me in welcoming Ann Vasbinder. I will now turn the presentation over to her.
Hi, my name is Ann Vasbinder, and I work at GlaxoSmithKline in Upper Merion, Pennsylvania, and I am here to tell you about our assessment process for externalized studies, which is a partnering between our external diligence group and our scientific review group. So the names of the people that are involved with this process are myself, Ann Vasbinder, Joanne Story in the UK, Mike Spangler here in Upper Merion, Brian Berridge here in Upper Merion. He heads up the Animal Research Strategy team, and I'll speak briefly about that team. Tanya Vanneman and Linda Fritz are my team members on my diligence team, and together we do the reviews for our externalized studies. I'll apologize up front if I get a little quiet for a second. I've had a terrible cold, so I'll try not to sniff and cough in the microphone. It's deafening. Okay. So I'm a part of a group called the Office of Animal Welfare Ethics and Strategy that's led by our Chief Veterinary Medical Officer, Margaret Landy. And we're a combination of science and compliance functions. I like to call them the license to operate more than compliance. The activities, my external diligence group really falls in the area of quality assurance. And we also have an internal quality assurance group that works within the office. Additionally, we have a risk management program, so we have quality and risk management. Ethical review processes are within the office, and the training program for anyone doing work with animals in research, the strategy for that is within the office. We also host the Animal Research Strategy Group, which is a group of scientists that provide guidance for our scientific partners in regard to scientific challenge and doing the right studies at the right time, looking at the right models, and I'll speak to that today. Looking at data sharing and data mining, and then also looking into alternatives and the 3 Rs. So driving this process is what we call Policy 403. It's the Care, Welfare, and Treatment of Animals by GSK. And this policy is a policy that describes what we expect when one would use animals on behalf of GSK, to include some basic things like access to food and water, access to species-appropriate housing, provision of humane veterinary care, housing to minimize the development of abnormal behaviors, adherence to the 3 Rs and application of the 3 Rs. The ethical review process and that it is established, and that we minimize pain and distress, and that staff are trained. Now, what you have to remember when you talk about studies at GSK, they could be done internally at a number of sites to include, the UK, the US, Spain, France, China, and even now we've recently merged with the company Novartis, so we have added new sites to our group to include India and other new China sites. So there's a lot of diversity in what internal work is, and then we also have an immense amount of work occurring outside the company on our behalf. So anyone who uses an animal on our behalf has to adhere to the criterion of Policy 403. So why do we need a diligence process? Well, because first of all, not all institutions, for example, have ALEC accreditation. You have varying standards across the world, and so what you have to do is say, GSK has these expectations, and this is what we're asking you to do. And why do we care about this? Well, we care because we're committed to having good animal welfare for animals used on our behalf. We have expectations, and we want them to be upheld. We also want to mitigate the reputational risk. We want to make sure that we do what we say we do in the eyes of the public, because ultimately it's the public that gives us the opportunity to care for and use animals in research. So we want to maintain a good reputation and be seen as a good steward for animals. And then also we want to assure that we have good quality in our science, that what's done on our behalf at a third party is to the quality that we need, so that we can make decisions on the data, not only for the animal welfare, but also for good science and the purposes of good science. We know there's tremendous opportunity out there in regard to science, and even in places that are less known for their scientific endeavors. So to take advantage of this opportunity, we have to mitigate the risks that are involved with using these potential organizations. And these risks could be legal, they could be operational, what is happening on the ground, what are they doing, and reputational for the company. So our program is focused on mitigating and managing the risk with externalized animal studies. Now, there are about 700 different institutions that we've engaged with in externalized studies, and I realize that this is a very large number compared to what most institutions will engage, but our company is very, very interested in looking at scientific ingenuity and new science ideas, and so they're out mining the scientific environment for new opportunities. So we have 700 institutions in our system, and last year, that was 2015, not this year, we had about 169 new submissions. Now, this number has varied a little bit because we've changed the way that we are documenting things in our database and such, so it looks a little smaller than last year, but actually it's probably a larger number. We've just consolidated some of the records. We document this information in a database. That's something that was made for us within GSK. We're very excited that our database is under renovation right now, so it'll be more searchable and handier to use. It's a paper-based review for starts, and then when we start to identify the risks, then we expand out into what other needs might be, what else we'd like to know about the institution, and that can include a scientific review or a site visit and collaborative work with the company for improvements. Our group is one of many groups that work that own risks within GSK. There are 13 described risks. We're the 13th risk, the animal risk, and so it's aligned with our new third-party oversight initiatives in the company, and it's been very interesting to be a part of seeing how do you manage risk to include things like, how does the company manage the potential that people are working in a healthy environment, or that there's good occupational health and safety programs for employees within these third parties that we work with, or are they truly a company at all, that they're a legitimate company. So we're aligned with that, and we're a part of the third party initiatives, and maybe next year I'll have a chance to speak to these third party initiatives and how GSK is managing them, and we fit into that bigger picture, because that's actually a very exciting new opportunity that we'll be involved with in the next year. So our paper-based review, what is that? Well, it's driven, it's been a long time in coming, and it's basically a set of 3 forms. And these forms are designed to kind of characterize what the work is that's happening at the third party. So for example, there are 3 forms. We've whittled it down to 2 now, but we haven't started using just 2, so we're in transition. But the forms characterize the third party animal care and use programs. And then so part of it's filled out by the GSK scientist and part of it's filled out by the third party. The GSK scientist describes the work that they're doing, the science that they're doing, the procedures that will be done, what animals are being used, and how many. It's a very high-level, brief description. And then also the considerations for ethical review to include pain and distress and the procedures that are being performed. So in general, we have a fairly good idea on paper of what is the third party and what is being done on GSK's behalf at the third party. So when someone wants to outsource a study at GSK, what would happen? The first thing that would happen is that the investigator knows that they're responsible for policy 403. And so they will contact our team through a group mailbox. An exciting new situation with this third-party work that's being done across GSK is that there'll be a portal now that this information will be funneled in through. So anyone who wants to externalize any work, it will go through this portal. So we'll be more likely to capture all the potential outsourced studies. Right now, we work very hard to apply Policy 403, but we can't be sure in some of these other sites that everyone knows about Policy 403. So this new method will help whittle everyone in through the same mechanism to request animal studies, which is, I think, will be a great opportunity for us to capture all of the studies that are outgoing. So for the time being, the investigator initiates an email and says that they want to do a study, and they give us a title and some details, and we send them forms through this group mailbox. They'll fill out the forms. They'll fill out the portion of the form that the GSK scientist is responsible for, and then they'll send on to the third party the form that is a fairly rigorous review of what the animal care and use program is at that institution. Once those forms are completed, they're returned to our team, and they're finalized. You know, it's much like an IACUC protocol. There's a lot of details that can be left off of these forms that, you know, when you do them every day, you know the things that you want to know, but the people who are filling them out for you may not realize what you're asking, and so it can take a little bit of back and forth trying to make sure that we get the right information and understand fully what's going on in the third party. We then convene a team of people once a week. This team is composed of 2 or 3 scientists and my Diligence team. One member of the Diligence team is a seasoned quality assurance person, and the other member of my team is a very experienced animal care and use supervisor, as well as very knowledgeable about training and other aspects of animal care and use programs. Together we sit down, and then I have a partner in the UK that also joins us often, because when there are issues with the UK, the bulk of our work is either in the US or the UK, though that there are many exceptions. It is very global, but you know, it is great to have backup in the UK to help us understand the systems and to be present for us representing the UK processes. So this team sits down and we talk about these protocols. There's a summary that's written by my group, and there's a discussion about what they're doing regarding the species, the duration of the study, the animal numbers, the level of pain and distress, and the possibility for problems with the studies. And you know, after this discussion, if there are any questions, those questions are clarified. Now, during this time, there are really 2 considerations for any procedure that we do, and that includes the institutional considerations and the scientific considerations. So, for example, institutional considerations could be, you know, do they have a security program in their institution? Do they have, you know, or is their caging appropriate? Do they have a cage wash? Do they, you know, and remembering that the institutions that we work with can be very, very diverse, from medical institutions to small biotech companies to medical device companies, and they can be anywhere in the world, from Australia to China to Singapore to the U.S. So there's just a huge diversity of what you see in regard to animal care and use programs. So it's worthy of a good look. We have gone about looking at standards for our expectations for the third parties, and in general, the standards are fairly aligned with those for the Guide for Care and Use of Animals. Remembering that in the UK, the Home Office has much more stringent guidelines than and much more less performance and more engineering-based standards. So, you know, so kind of matching up those expectations with some corporate standards has been an important process for us. So what I was talking about was basically there are two considerations for review: the institution and then the science. And the science is reviewed by a team of by our team, and we decide if there's a scientific review that's involved. And I'm going to give a few more details about our scientific review process to follow this. And then also we look and see, do we need a site visit? And the site visit will either be arranged based on the institution or the scientific need, and then there's an approval granted that allows the investigators to perform the work with the third party. We also are starting to use a new process called a risk rating tool. Now, risk is actually considered the probability of an incident happening against the potential impact. So, you know, you can have high incidence but low impact events, or you can have low incidence but high impact events. And so, you know, really trying to balance and look at where is the true risk for the company and how do we manage it. And we found that there hasn't been, in the past, there has been a set of criterion that are considered, but it hasn't been formalized in any kind of way to know, well, are we going to do a site visit or not? How do we know if we feel confident about what we're doing with this institution? And so we've come up, my team has come up with a risk rating tool, and that helps us identify the likelihood that an event will happen and the impact. And we look at things like the country where the work is being done, recognizing that in some countries that there aren't animal research laws and regulations. And so, you know, really trying to scrutinize what's happening in those countries. It doesn't mean that there's not good research occurring there or that they have poor quality research. It means that we need to consider them a risk because we don't know what their standards are. There are countries where, in general, the EU states have agreed standards, but those can't always be, they aren't always implemented in the same way. So we like to do a little more investigation in these countries. We put priority review for species. Monkeys, dogs, and pigs get a higher review than rodents do, not because they're less important or we have less animal welfare, but because they have a higher impact potential. And so if primates are used, there is usually some kind of follow-up on the scientific review process. Pain categorization is also a factor. We look at the number of animals used, and if they're ALAC accredited, we have a good sense of the standard that they're following if an institution is ALAC accredited, so the institutional aspects or concerns for the studies are less for us when we consider the risk. This risk rating tool will help us more consistently identify when we want to perform site visits, because, you know, in the past it's been a judgment, but I think judgment still is an opportunity in this, but we do try, it gives us a better tool to think about the impact and the risk involved. So our site visits, I mentioned, are based on compliance with core principles in our policy 403. And our performance standards align fairly closely with the Guide for Care and Use for any program that we use globally. And they're not rigid. We are willing to have a reasonable consideration for exceptions, but they need to be presented and we need to understand them. When a site visit is performed, we send an individual out, and I spoke about institutional needs for site visit and science needs. So it depends on what that need is with that institution. For example, if we're working with an intricate surgical model at an institution, then we would send a surgeon or a veterinarian that has experience with that surgery to do the site visit, but we also ask them to collect institutional facts while they're there. We have different people in the organization that perform site visits. People in our organization could be part of our GLP quality assurance group, or they could be expert laboratory animal science technicians that are trained. Anyone going out to do a site visit on our behalf has to be trained, and that's documented in their training file. And then we have a checklist format that we provide for them before they go out that allows them to make notes and check off very specific activities that we want them to look at. You know, it might be the floors and the flooring, the caging, the cage wash area, appropriate use of sanitation. So there's a whole set of things that we check off when we look at an institution. And then there's a recommendation made, should we use this institution or not, that's made by the site visitor at the time. Now, if there are, we categorize the findings for an institution in critical, major, and minor. The critical would be something that would affect the welfare of animals, and that will get immediate attention and stop the work being done until we can get that issue resolved. Major would be programmatic problems that need to be addressed and managed by the institution and will be rechecked by GSK. And then minor would be things that we would give recommendations on, but not necessarily hold up the work for that institution. Those are documented and tracked. They're called corrective actions when there are problems identified. So we have had, even recently, institutions where we've reviewed them and said there are corrective actions that must happen before we can continue to use this institution. And the institution has gone, we agreed on when we would revisit the site and then have gone back to confirm that the appropriate actions were taken and that we were confident that the standards were met, our standards were met. These site visits are stored in our database for the institutions and can be reviewed upon the next site visit. We have frequently used institutions, for example, contract research organizations that we would use on a routine basis for things, routine studies like, drug metabolism or pharmacokinetics or safety assessment protocols, and those are typically visited by our GLP or Good Laboratory Practices Quality Assurance Group because they would be visiting them anyway. So that gives us a lot of it helps us out. We don't have to do as many site visits, and we pick up the information from those routine partners. So I mentioned that some of our studies undergo all studies that are performed on behalf of GSK need to go through a scientific review, and the scientific review. Just make sure. Oh, sorry about that, guys. Okay. The scientific review basically is challenging that we are doing the right study at the right time in the right way. So things that we would ask are, do we need an animal model to answer this question? Is there something that's in vitro that could replace this animal model? And if we do need an animal model, what animal model is the right model? And you can use a lot of different animal models and ask the same question different ways, but are you getting to the right answer? And is that translational to the human condition? And then what's the right study design to balance animal use with optimizing scientific impact? So are these studies actually providing answers for our questions, and are we asking the right questions? So our goals would be to optimize the translational value of our animal models and hopefully lowering the rate of failure of our medicines that we're developing in our pipeline. Also to not use animal models unless we have to use animal models, and make sure what we're doing is creating an answer for how our medicines will respond in the human. We're looking to effectively leverage the internal expertise and experience. So that could be for studies internal or external to GSK, that we use the knowledge that we have within GSK to improve the science that GSK has performed on its behalf, whether it's internally institution or external. And making sure that we are judiciously using animals, that we are applying the concepts of the 3 R's, and that we are truly trying to replace animals where there are opportunities to do so and reduce the numbers that we use. So internal to GSK, we have two different strategies that we used. It's kind of a two-tiered approach. The first one, and I mentioned the team the scientific review team at the front of my talk, and these are the folks that are doing this work. Internally, we asked animal model strategy team reviews. This is an investigator-initiated but supported by our team process that's a hypothesis-focused discussion, basically, with the team. And it's usually multidisciplinary input with a standard set of questions that are addressing the animal models that they're using. And this should occur prior to the ethical review process. This typically will happen with severe models or models that are used very frequently that might be severe. It might be models that are in higher species and or models that we're making critical decisions on and we're concerned or interested in the translatability of the science. The other study protocol review process is one that's led by the investigators. The TAU is a focal group of scientists studying one disease process. It's hosted by the investigators, and it's a peer review process, and it would be something that's internal to their organization, and they would have a protocol or a forum that they typically performed on their own, and it would happen prior to studies, and as studies are designed and developed for drug development. And this would happen for all studies that are performed within those scientific units, and it's kind of a self-driven process. And often the scientists will come to our team to ask about their peer review processes and how to best implement peer review, so we can serve as consultatory group as a part of our animal research strategy. So if you continuously challenge good use of animals, this is just a pictorial of what I've just described, that there's an animal model strategy team that then performs prospective peer review of animal models and strategies, and usually this is leveraging kind of our internal expertise, and it can be multidisciplinary. For example, you might have someone who does clinical trials and the human physician sitting on a panel like that, as well as, for example, someone from drug metabolism and somebody from the scientific expertise area. So it's a panel of people, whereas the other peer review process is really more driven out of our worldwide guidance that is internal to the scientific group, and it assures that there's robust study design and reproducible scientific methodology. Okay, so back to third-party oversight. What do we do to assure that we do the scientific review or accomplish scientific review within these studies, because there's so many of them? Well, when we go through and we, the scientists fill out the forms that we give them. They're called B forms. I'm trying to get away from it, but we can't seem to lose the name of it. There's a scientific they have to agree that a scientific review has been conducted in some format. And this is a yes or no response. And so the expectation is that all studies undergo some kind of study review. Now, the triggers for further review would be if there were non-human primates or a severe category. Severe would be equivalent to the U.S. Category E studies. And so, when that happens, this will prompt the initiation of our external review process. And so one of the people in our team that reviews the external studies will reach out to the scientists and ask for further details, and they'll go through that question-based process of reviewing how we the set of questions about our animal models, translatability, how the studies are designed, and sometimes statisticians can get involved. And so this is basically a partnered process. So yes, so the questions that are asked are basically things like, how well do we understand the human condition we're intending to model, and how well is the systemic and molecular physiology of our intended patient replicated in this model? So in other words, are there more relevant mechanistic studies that could be done rather than doing the whole animal study to find the same outcome for the study? How well do our models replicate the expected pharmacology in patients? Are the models even relevant? Do they have the same DMPK parameters? And then how well does the model replicate the etiology and pathogenesis of the patient disease? Because in many cases, the animal models don't perfectly replicate that process. Gosh, I got through that really quickly. So in general, our GSK, we have an oversight for institutions that are that we do use as partners for third-party scientific work. It starts with a paper-based review, and we have a team of experts to include quality assurance, laboratory animal science, veterinarians, and scientists that review the protocols that we put out and have a chance to evaluate both the qualifications of the institution and the science that is done on behalf of GSK. We use a risk rating tool. The risk rating tool helps us establish the impact and the likelihood of an event occurring. And then this process is partnered with the scientific review process, particularly if there are primates involved or if they're high pain and distress, we'll go ahead and perform this scientific review process. I neglected to say that our team meets once a week. So if someone were to put a proposal into us, we try and turn it around within a 1-week period of time. So after the scientific review process is completed, then we determine if there needs to be a site visit. A site visit may or may not occur, and then institutions are either approved or disapproved for use by GSK. These are all managed in an auditable database and are part of the risk mitigation process for GSK regarding third-party oversight. So I got through that pretty quickly. Let's go to questions.
One moment, please, while I grab the questions. Okay, so we have one question from Charlotte Thompson of Western University. How are community representatives involved in your site visits and review processes?
So we don't have community representatives involved in our site visits. This is an internal process for review where we use our scientific community and our laboratory animal sciences expertise to review institutions that we use. We do have ethical review processes, so ongoing, each of these institutions has to have an ethical review process, and that's a completely separate review, and it's required of any study done on our behalf that the institution has an ethical review committee and that there is ethical review for any study that we do. And so external participants from the community are involved in those processes through the institutions that are third parties.
Great. Amanda Hobson from BioPharm asks, does your team review protocols? And if so, how do you deal with not delaying the research while also reviewing close to finalized protocol language barriers in the UK?
Okay. So we don't review IACUC protocols, and that is actually one of the criticisms of this process from our investigators is that it's somewhat redundant with IACUC protocol processes. So we don't review IACUC protocols, but we do review our templates and the information that we need to assess and evaluate the science that's ongoing outside of the ethical review processes. So I'm not sure if your question about are you reviewing protocols. No, we do not review IACUC protocols. Language barriers can be a significant problem. And the way that we overcome that is by partnering with the scientists. And it can be very difficult. For example, we have investigators in China. And things mean something different to them and also they don't have the same expectations. For example, we have a very hard time aligning contracts with China. It's just a difference in expectations in their legal language. And it's the same thing for animal care and use programs. Now, that said, that's one area where ALEC accreditation is tremendously helpful, because you know that someone's been on the ground and has looked at the programs, and many institutions in China, for example, in India, have sought ALEC accreditation so that there's a sense of confidence about the quality of their laboratory animal programs. That's in a nutshell, I think that's the answer to your question. I hope I have answered your question. Oh, so you asked me, you asked me how do we feel, how do you get past the language barriers? Often we can do a few different things. We have partners within laboratory animal sciences that speak both English and the other language. For example, we have sites in Belgium and they speak French, and so for us we'll partner with one of our people that works in the office that speaks French and English, and that's very helpful. Or we have like key people that speak English and Chinese in our group that are laboratory animal scientists that are very helpful to us. And so we can either initiate a phone conversation or emails that provide clarity to those questions that we didn't understand when it comes to language barriers.
Great. Wendy Underwood from Eli Lilly & Co. asks, how does your team ensure that a model is valid and reproducible?
Hi, Wendy. Thanks for your question. You know, it's a complex process. It takes a lot of research. Our team has to sit down, look through all the literature, and you have to remember it's a tough position that you're somebody going in advising an investigator that has expertise in that model, has long-term expertise in that model, so you better be sharp on your skills with that science. Sometimes we go back and we'll look at clinical trial outcomes and the models that were used and compare them to how well those animal models answered the translatability of the work. And there are some models that are gaining less popularity just in general because they're just not as predictive as they had once been thought to be. Other things that we're doing is we're working with groups such as the IQ3Rs and other organizations that are advancing alternatives, because I think in some cases there are physiologic models that don't represent the smaller pieces of what is translatability between an animal and a human. They're different and they're disconnected, so we're really trying to advance some of those alternatives that would look at the mechanistic steps rather than the systemic effects of diseases. But it takes a lot of research, and the other thing is just really looking at how well have these predictive models led to answers to our questions. And I don't know, Wendy, if you can speak to this, but I would love to hear what you're doing at Eli Lilly.
Great. Marcia Bauer of Boston Scientific asks, is the scientific review you are discussing done for GlaxoSmithKline directed interests? For instance, if GlaxoSmithKline management has decided to fund the work, does your group have the ability to question or change the proposed scientific processes?
Yes, we do actually, and it can be raised up through our chief veterinarian. If we thought that there were studies being done on behalf of GSK that did not appropriately represent good science or were adequately translatable, or they were something that didn't have scientific relevance or translatability, that those studies would not be done on our behalf. There would be a sit-down between the chief veterinarian, the scientific staff that have identified the problem, the investigators, and there would be then a scientific review process that probably involved, for example, clinicians and other expertise that would comment on the models that were being proposed. So yes, we do have that capability. It's not a popular decision, but if it's done on behalf of the animals, that's our responsibility.
If there are no more questions, I'd like to once again thank Dr. Vasbinder for her presentation. Do you have any final comments?
Thank you so much for letting me share our thoughts about third-party oversight, and I would love to hear from you if you have methods that you use. Some of the things that we're thinking about in the future are, for example, reducing the number of institutions that we work with so it's a little more predictable and a little less risk. But then we're afraid that we'll lose some of the interesting, ingenuitive work that's being brought into the company. I know that that's the approach that many other pharmaceutical companies have taken. And I think that these processes are advancing the scientific review and really investigating good science is going to be a way forward for decreasing animal use and improving the outcomes of our studies and study designs. We got one more question.
Thank you once again, Dr. Ann Vasbinder. Before we go, I would like to let everyone know that today's webcast will be available for on-demand viewing for 6 months from today's live event. You will receive an email from LabRoots letting you know when this webcast will be available for replay. Please share the announcement with your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. That's all for now. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again. Goodbye.